right. Okay. Good evening, everybody. You'll forgive me if I indulge in a little bit of kind of 1980s nostalgia before we begin. But some of you will remember way back in 1985, those of you old enough to remember, a glorious day in July when the world tuned in to watch Live Aid, and the announcer at Wembley Stadium came out with the following words: "It's 12 noon in London, it's 7 a.m. in Philadelphia, and around the world it's time for Live Aid." Well, today, due to the geographical locations of some of our speakers and our guests, like the Live Aid announcer, I get to say something similar. So it's just after 6 p.m. in Cork, after 1 p.m. on the East Coast, and after 10 a.m. on the Pacific Coast. And you're all very welcome to this, the final Dante dialogue of the spring series. And we really do have a fascinating one for you today. I'm just going to, if you don't mind, just bring up my screen here, because I just want to mention a couple of things. So before we get on to today's topic, I want to say a few words about the Centre for Dante Studies in Ireland, its work and what we've been able to do over the last while. And it's been a very, I suppose, it's been quite an intense few months with Dante events happening all over the world on a daily basis, conferences, symposia, lectures, seminars and exhibitions. And we here at the CDSI, I think, have contributed in no small part. And I want to take this opportunity to thank my centre colleagues for all of their hard work. From the public lecture series that we started back in January and February, to the online exhibition of Liam O'Brien's lithographs, to these fascinating Dante dialogues that we have had over the last 3 months. So I just want to also thank all our many guests, Alison Cornish, Zig Baranski, Simon Gilson, Lino Pertile, Tristan Kay, Rebecca Bowen, Akash Kumar, Heather Webb, Simone Marchesi, George Corbett, Paolo Zublena, Corinne Salvador Lonergan, Julianne Simpson, and Kristen Dupont, and our two speakers today, Melissa and George. I want to thank everybody for their time, for their expertise, their spirit of collaboration, which is something very important to us, and also for their humor in indulging us. But especially, I want to thank the team here at the CDSI for their indefatigable work, their boundless enthusiasm, the creativity they bring to all of to make sure that these events come to fruition. So well done, and thank you to David Bowe, to Federica Coluzzi, to Valentina Mele, to Lele Livraghi, and to Dario Galassini. Can I just make sure that everybody has their mics turned off? We are now coming to the end of this academic year, so but rest assured we have plenty of events planned for September onwards. But we at the centre, I think, need to take a little bit of a break, and I dare say you need to take a little bit of a break from us as well. One item of good news that I want to mention before we begin today's event, and that is that I'm delighted to report that the physical exhibition of Liam O'Brien's 100 Dante-inspired lithographs has opened in Dublin Castle. So if you happen to be in the Hibernian metropolis, or intend indeed going there, make sure to visit. It is very well worth it. The exhibition is running until October. And if for whatever reason you can't make it, I'm just going to be letting people in here as we go along, you can't make it, don't forget that our online sister exhibition curated by our very own Dario Galassini is available, and you can access that until the 31st of December 2021, the end of the Anno Dantesco. And there is the web address should you want to visit that. So talking about Liam's wonderful responses to Dante's Commedia, I think is an appropriate way to introduce this evening's unique event, illustrating Dante. Now, I'm going to let David introduce our guests individually, and he will also mediate to this evening's event. But by way of introduction, I just wanted to add, if you like, a personal note because during this year and a bit of global pandemic, we, I think, have all been exposed to different and difficult challenges. Distances have been imposed and necessary restrictions dutifully, I suppose, embraced. And each of us fell into kind of unfamiliar patterns of behavior and routine. And on that score, I have to say that one of the things that I would do each morning was to open up my Twitter account for a very deliberate and a very specific reason. Because 9 times out of 10, there would be a delicious tweet from one or both of today's speakers, Melissa Conway and George Cochrane, with a beautiful picture of an exquisite detail from a Dante manuscript in Melissa's case, as she journeyed through the digital archives, or some surprisingly new and arresting image in George's case, as he invited us daily into his studio to marvel at his, well, I would say, informed creative responses to Dante's text in the creation of his truly new Dante manuscript. So before we begin, I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. I just want to thank them both for serving up this daily pictorial feast across the Twitter sphere, and for allowing us to bring these, as well, seemingly disparate visual objects into dialogue with each other today. Now, as I've said before, of all the other dialogues in our series about what the aim of the series is, so imagine, if you will, a group of friends gathered together in a cozy, warm Irish pub. They hit upon a topic, and each speaks passionately about their particular take on that topic, holding their ground, but allowing the dialogue to flourish. This is our hope for the series. And Melissa and George, you are most welcome. And can I, just before I hand over to David now, can I just ensure that everybody except our speakers today has their microphones turned off, and David, a te la parola.
Thank you, Dara, and thank you everyone for coming along this evening, despite my apparent best efforts to misdirect people with defunct links. It's lovely to see you all, and lovely to be able to welcome Melissa and George this evening. As Dara said, their work on their ongoing documenting of their work on Twitter has been a real highlight of the pandemic, and this is a dialogue very much born on social media. So I included in the poster, I believe, and certainly in the announcements, the Twitter handles for both of our speakers. If you're not already following them, do yourselves a favor and do so immediately. George has been somewhat quiet of late, as he's been busily trying to depict Paradiso in his art. He promises us more fantastic content to come, and Melissa's account is a daily joy of interest from the digital archives of Dante manuscript, Dante illustration. I'm going to introduce both of our speakers straight away together at the start, and then I'll be passing over to Melissa first, and then to George to talk to us a bit about the work that they've been doing in the studio, online, in the archives, digital and real, or physical, I should say, because the archive itself is a sufficiently abstract concept that reality perhaps isn't quite the right word to distinguish. And from the Dublin of Liam O'Brien's exhibition to a very different Dublin, that's Dublin, New Hampshire, where George Cochrane, one of our second speaker this evening, was raised after having been born in Germany. He's now an artist and a professor of fine art at Farley Dickinson University in Florham Park, New Jersey. He began his training at the Cambridge School of Western Massachusetts and continued at Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville, New York, where he earned his BA. During a junior year abroad, he worked at the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice and spent academic time in Florence studying language and fine art at Sarah Lawrence College and art history at the Università di Firenze. He has an MFA from Hunter College, City University of New York, and his oil paintings and drawings have been exhibited at the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art in North Adams, Castello dei Conti Guidi in Poppi in Italy, the Guildhall in East Hampton, New York, Memento Art in Brooklyn, Ripetti Art Gallery in Long Island City, and Martin Kudlek in Cologne, among other places. George has illustrated and hand-lettered his own font for the 2018 edition of The Inferno, published by Thornwillow Press of Newburgh, New York, a volume which received an enthusiastic reception. Of note, Columbia University invited George to publish his commentary on the 16 selected pages on their website, Digital Dante, a resource with which I'm sure you're all familiar, as useful as it is. As is perhaps not as enthusiastic a reception as the recent Kickstarter for his new manuscript, which I think is continuing to grow now over on Indiegogo, which is going to bring to us a completely new manuscript about which George is going to be talking to us this evening, of the Divine Comedy, fully hand-lettered and illustrated. A serious and significant undertaking and a real boon in this anniversary year. Dr. Melissa Conway, meanwhile, holds several academic degrees from American and Canadian universities, culminating with a PhD in medieval studies from Yale University, an interdisciplinary degree covering the art, literature, and history and languages of the Middle Ages. She has years of experience teaching literature, language, history, and art history, as well as serving as a manuscript curator, including at the Library of Congress's Rare Book and Special Collections Division, the Folger Shakespeare Library, the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale, where she served as assistant to the curator of manuscripts during her grad school years. And the greatest part of her professional career was spent as a chief curator of the Arcana Collection, one of the leading private collections of illuminated medieval and Renaissance manuscripts in the world, from which she retired in 2016 after 25 years. She's presently only in semi-retirement, however, and somehow busier than she's ever been. Not only bringing us the gems from her exploration of the digital archives on Twitter, but teaching graduate courses on medieval and Renaissance manuscripts at the California Rare Book School at UCLA. Traveling frequently until the pandemic, that is, and escaping the geopolitical chaos by traveling digitally through manuscripts of the Commedia throughout this more stationary pandemic year. It's just a year, isn't it? I can never tell anymore. She's the author of dozens of publications on pre-1600 manuscripts, including the Diario of the Printing Press of San Jacopo di Ripoli, published by Olszki in Florence in 1999, the transcription and commentary of a manuscript chronicling the day-by-day history of the first humanist press in Florence. With co-author Dr. Lisa Fagan Davis, she compiled a directory of more than 500 institutions in the United States and Canada with medieval and Renaissance manuscript holdings, published by the Bibliographical Society of America in 2015, another invaluable resource. And she and Dr. Fagan Davis are currently working on an update of the same, which I'm sure many of us will be looking forward to keenly. So with those introductions, I would like to say very little at this point, but open the floor to our speakers who have agreed to speak. First, Melissa, bringing us up to date on the history of Dante manuscript illustration, and judging by recent Twitter photos, George bringing us up to the very, very recent present of Dante illustration, as he has been working till moments before joining us on Zoom this evening on his illustrations for the Paradiso. I will now mute myself, and Dara, I think, is going to run the slides for Melissa. So thank you very much. Melissa, please take us away.
Okay. Well, first, I want to thank Dara O'Connor and David Bowe and the Center for Dante Studies in Ireland for inviting me to be part of this dialogue with George Cochrane, a dialogue to which I have been very much looking forward. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of illustrated manuscripts of the Commedia, while also discussing how the pandemic affected and quite literally reshaped my entire approach to this research, leading me to the discovery of dozens and dozens of full color, fully digitized manuscripts. As my original focus was more deluxe manuscripts of the 15th century, I'm quite certain I would otherwise have ignored many of these, too many of these earlier manuscripts. I also want to talk about the surprising role that social media played in my project, Twitter in particular, which is in fact how George, Dara, and David, how we all met. So for next slide, please, Dara. Just for a little historical background, Dante's Commedia was immensely and almost immediately in wide distribution. Over 800 copies of it survived, 600 from the 14th century alone. We can presume that if that many survive, at least that many have been lost, perhaps even more. There's evidence that copies of the Inferno were circulating as early as 1313, and copies of the entire Commedia survived from the early 1330s. Perhaps even more surprising, illustrated copies of the Commedia began to appear very, very early in the history of its distribution, with one of the earliest shown here, manuscript 1080 of the Biblioteca Travoziana, dated 1337, with that wonderful historiated initial N featuring Dante and Virgil setting off, and look at those marvelous inhabited margins telling more of Canto 1. Next slide, please. Another manuscript that is firmly dated is the Staatsbibliothek Hamilton 203, which was created in 1347, 10 years after the Travoziana manuscript. I'm particularly fond of this opening leaf with Dante at his desk, and that initial letter N, which is opening the text, doing double duty as a window in Dante's study, a motif I have yet to see repeated. Next slide, please. Another very early illustrated manuscript is the Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale Palatino 313, also known as the Poggiale manuscript. It's perhaps the earliest manuscript to include illustrations for all three canticles. There are 33 images for Inferno, 2 for Purgatorio, and 3 for Paradiso. And for all the mawkishness of this simple little sketch, there's something really endearing about how intently Dante focuses his brow on that, right? He's furrowing his brow on as he looks at his writing. Next slide, please. Now, the majority of the 800 surviving manuscripts are not, of course, illustrated. Illustrations were an added expense that most 14th century readers could not afford. There are only about 50 manuscripts in all that have significant programs of illustration, and of those, only a handful provide images beyond the Inferno. In fact, the majority of the extant illustrated manuscripts are minimally illustrated. There are several dozen manuscripts with historiated initial letters opening the canticles and nothing more, and many others might have only one illustration, as this opening leaf in the Bayonet 70, which I like to say makes up for in exuberance what it lacks in finesse. For me, suddenly having nothing but time because of the lockdown to examine these manuscripts leaf by leaf was an amazing opportunity. It was leisure I hadn't experienced, I don't know, since I was a child in summers. I made a rule for myself that once I found a digitized commedia, no matter how ungainly the art might seem to my eye at first, I had to look at every single leaf. Next slide, please. I applied my rule to any digitized copy of the Commedia, including unillustrated manuscripts as well. And those efforts were often rewarded with the discovery of, in quotation marks, illustrations or illustrations of a sort. There were a lot of diagrams, there were elaborate manucles, which I've shown you two here. There were these winsome little beasts carrying catchwords in their mouths, or even, as here, just these simple faces drawn into the bowls of letters. And I have to think, I mean, the faces actually had expressions, and this one was particularly glum in the O in Inferno 5, as if it was reading along with us, that sad story of Francesca and Paolo. What I found from this patient practice of examining every leaf of every manuscript, from the clumsiest to the most sublime, was that each opened a window into the early and wide distribution of Dante's great work. And I had a real appreciation of how the readership of Dante's poem extended across class lines. Next slide, please. While my research into the study of the illustrations is a serious endeavor, one can't and one ought not to be serious all the time. With this in mind, I began, just for fun, to post on Twitter in more or less tongue-in-cheek fashion, and at times I would say, pretty irreverently. I started out describing the color and cut of Dante's garb. I was surprised at how much variety there was, and so I pretended I was writing a fashion magazine. Here he is in sky blue, draped in a soft pink wrap, with headgear of worked gold, with ambitions to be a papal tiara, or at the very least, a bishop's mitre. But my tweets always included a full reference to the manuscript's call number, the canticle in question, the leaf number, such localization as was available, as well as date, usually approximate because so few are dated, the repository, and the city in which the repository was located. I also would include an image of the entire leaf with measurements so that anyone following my tweets could at least get a sense of the image in context, as well as the overall layout of the manuscript. As I've been interested in portraits of Dante for years, I also had some fun tweeting about the variety in his appearance in all these different manuscripts. For example, in this image, I just loved his pensive pose, that head cocked, fingers to his lips as if he's thinking, what can I rhyme with vita? Oh, I got it, smarita. Next slide, please. So here we have the Hamilton 204 from the Staatsbibliothek. Dante looks here as if he's some kind of rough guy with a 5 o'clock shadow. Next slide. And then we have the baby-faced fellow in pink here. Next slide, please. Or if you'll excuse me, this hubba hubba Ken doll Dante. Next slide. Sometimes he even has a full beard. Next slide. With the Marchiana artist, there's something closer to a portrait of Dante seated at his desk. If you look at it, I know it's not the clearest image, but you can see that he has the aquiline nose that we associate with Dante, the kind of narrow face. And that could have been, given the time at the end of the 14th century, perhaps based on some knowledge of the circa 1335 portraits in the Bargello in Florence that's still attributed to Giotto. Although this portrait on the same leaf that I've taken a cutout of and placed as close as I could to the other, it seems like our Dante here has undergone a bit of a rhinoplasty. I mean, who's this button-nosed guy suddenly wearing Dante's clothes? Now, all kidding aside, I really do think this was this rather skilled artist's way of differentiating between Dante the poet and Dante the pilgrim. But it's also kind of funny. So that's what, Dante getting a nose job, which I'll bet you he would have wanted anyhow. So next slide, sorry, Jar. Another interesting portrait of Dante. Here he is writing at his desk, and the artist has the dark wood kind of growing up in his imagination, rising right around him. Next slide. Sometimes an artist really gets the mood just right. Here, Dante's gloom is palpable as he sits. He's virtually trapped in the tight confines of that initial N, with his head tilted down and his hands resting kind of listlessly on his lap. And whatever your opinion might be of this artist's technical skill, he managed to pack a lot of emotion into that compact space. Next slide. Looking through so many different manuscripts, I developed a deeper appreciation for these earlier, less polished manuscripts. I recognized that there was significant artistic sophistication in these earlier works. This example, where the artist, despite a rather rudimentary understanding of human anatomy, manages to convey a great deal of drama in Dante's fearful hesitancy, signaled by his crossed arms, that tightened fist, and his raised index finger, as if he wants to say, now just wait a minute, and Virgil just forges ahead, leading him right out of the format of the initial N and into the text itself. Next slide. And I found this motif was pretty popular. It was repeated many, many times. They're all on my Twitter feed. So here we have Dante and Virgil walking out of that initial N and into the text. And what I liked was that no two were exactly alike, but it was very popular and I think absolutely effective. Okay, next slide, please. Dating and localizing pre-1600 manuscripts, most of which are not dated, is an imprecise science at best, but I was still surprised by the variety of artistic styles that had been just localized to Florence and environs. Now, while I would say the script here is undoubtedly Florentine, I had a hard time imagining that these really stiff and slender figures with those very formalized gestures, if you look at the full leaf, were necessarily produced by a Florentine artist. I'm not sure they aren't, I'm not sure they are, but I just have questions. Next slide, please. This too has been localized to the Florentine area. And the next slide, as has this one, roughly contemporary, which I will say looks Florentine to me, but these three different, and I could give you many more examples, but there's such a marked divergence in style, it makes me at least wonder how accurate these localizations can be. Next slide, please. So after months of looking through so many different manuscripts, almost 100 so far, and now, and counting, I realized that much could be gained by just this more systematic examination of these lesser known manuscripts. Next slide, please. For example, a systematic codicological, paleographical, and iconographic examination of all of these manuscripts could provide clues to dating and localizing more precisely a sizable corpus of surviving manuscripts. Next slide, please. It seems that many of the manuscripts with more limited programs of illustrations, those, for example, with only historiated initials opening the canticles, are the work of some pretty skilled artists, as this example here. By ignoring these manuscripts, I think we've been missing out on the work of some of the same artists who probably worked on the more deluxe manuscripts. To my eyes, this is a major work, probably Florentine, but listed only as Italian by the Madrid repository. I'm not faulting Madrid, not everybody has the expertise, but I do feel that we could do a lot more in identifying these. Next slide. Which leads me back to those luscious deluxe manuscripts that I love so much. Next slide, please. Actually, studying the earlier manuscripts so carefully has made me aware of the continuity and the evolution of so many motifs. Next slide, please. Remember this guy? I just showed you his more advanced version. Next slide, please. So the better we understand those earlier manuscripts, I think the richer our comprehension of the 15th century manuscripts is bound to be. Next slide, please. And there's so much to admire, so much to love in those later manuscripts. Next slide. So start checking out those digitized manuscripts that are free and open to anyone, and then start enjoying your own digital pilgrimage. Next slide. Okay, thanks so much. There's one of those little animals carrying the catchword in its bill.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Melissa, for a really wonderful talk and a wonderful selection of images, including some familiar favorites and some new friends, I'm sure. It really is quite remarkable now, like as you say, the amount of work that can precisely be done sat at one's desk to make these kind of large scale comparisons and take advantage of the kind of the level of archival and digitization that is now a kind of part and parcel of fortunately of manuscript studies. So we've looked now with Melissa's talk and got a very clear sense of some of the evolutions of early manuscript illustration. At which point, without kind of further interpolation on my part, I'd like to go straight to George and see what's happening now in terms of the illustration of a brand new Dante manuscript.
Thank you. I just want to just take a moment to thank you all for being here. Thank you for the invitation to share my work and to really be, the unlikely fruit that Twitter has borne here. I'm really kind of touched by, because social media is something that is likely a part of all of our lives, and how we use it and how we interact with it, and the way we can find meaning and value and inspiration there, and other people with similar interests and passions across the globe is evident by this forum here today. So I'm just really very honored to be a part of that. Apologies to my Twitter audience, but when I get to talking a little bit about Paradiso, I think I'll make clear why I've had to go dark, so to speak. But the light is about to shine again, and at the end of the slides that you'll see, you will actually be the first to see what I think is, well, I'll let you decide what you think. You can start the slides. Thank you. So this talk is unlike Melissa's wonderful talk. Is not closely scripted to the image. So I'm going to use the images as a little bit of a springboard to talk about the project in general, my research approaches, and the relationship that I see between illuminated manuscripts and graphic novels, a connection that I make again and again. So we begin with an invitation that came from a publisher to make a new illuminated manuscript of the Divine Comedy in the end of 2014. I was working on my autobiographical graphic novel in which Dante is a character. And when the publisher saw that I had this interest in Dante, he told me about the anniversary coming up and thought it would be a cool idea to make a new version, new manuscript version, printed letterpress that would essentially highlight the beauty of the lettering with initially as conceived few illustrations. One at the beginning of the canticle rather, one at the end, and perhaps as many as 3 in between, but probably not many more than 5 illustrations throughout. And when I said yes to this project, of course, I had no idea actually as to the scale of the undertaking, the idea of sitting down and handwriting the entire poem. Yeah, you can kind of just move along a little bit. So here is my typical workstation for, this is Purgatory. That is a facsimile of the Landiano, which is datable. I was looking to, conceptually, my desire was to put in front of the contemporary reader as close to the experience of the way a reader in Dante's age would have encountered the poem. So written in hand with some degree of illustration that accompanies the text. The difference being that I did not engage in what I would have thought to be kind of a kitsch operation and tried to make a font, a script from the medieval period, but rather update it with what is, I think, a very universally legible font, the comic font, which I developed over the years of making my graphic novel. So I had this idea that I wanted to look as if it would have appeared in Dante's era. And I also wanted to, take the artist's initiative, I guess, to not be a scholar and not try to make something that I guess was tidy. What do I mean by that? Well, as I began my research and discovered quickly that there's no autograph of the poem. And so people have been arguing about what the poem is basically since the day it started circulating. And, I have books that you can hold a heavy door open with that detail the differences between Petrocchi's version and somebody else's, and why this is better and why that's better and why this is better and that and all the rest of it. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start the reader off with Petrocchi. So Inferno is Petrocchi. So you start in what is a familiar Italian to a native reader or someone like myself who is, learned the language to a degree much later in life. an Italian with a uniform, modernized spelling and punctuation, and you know, appears as it would appear. But that's not how it looked in Dante's day. So you can go on to the next slide. So I wanted to work from a book. I wanted to copy a manuscript. So I was lucky to find, with the help of my friend and now collaborating publisher, Giovanni Scorcioni of Facsimile Finder, I found one of the 188 extant copies of the Landiano produced 100 years ago this year in Florence. That is a facsimile of the manuscript. It would be of less immediate interest to Melissa, as it is completely unillustrated. But it is datable, we believe, to 1336, which is as early as I could get in a facsimile form that I could have my hand on without trying to do this digitally, because I did try to, you know, find a manuscript, put it on my screen and copy it. Not happening. I needed a book. I needed the experience of my eye passing down the page, all of the extra memory devices that you engage when you remember that you read something and it was at the top of the page on the left or the bottom of the page on the right, and all of these things cement and kind of allow the text to land in a way that I knew I needed to if I was going to engage with this, you know, ridiculous thing of trying to, like, you know, come after Botticelli and Doré, and, you know, I mean, the number of Michelangelo, the number of artists who've tangled with the poem is staggering and shocking and overwhelming. And I felt like I needed to do my research. So part of it was about the text itself. So I took the sort of curious twist of, for the second canticle, other than using the modern font, I, as accurately as I could, and I'm sure someday, maybe, well, not sure someday, but maybe if somebody ever compares mine to it, they'll find somewhere where I made a mistake, but I exactly copied the Landiano. There are only, I don't even think this one is digitized. It may be now because I haven't kept up. But when I started this, only 188 people could conceivably go and have an experience with this manuscript. The way Italian looked in an era as close to Dante as possible, with no standardized spelling, virtually no punctuation, no question marks, no quotation marks, no accents, no, you know, words that we now divide in order to be able to make better sense of are slammed together in compound formation. All of these things are presented. So my feeling was, aha, now native Italian speakers, for whom I will forever be jealous because of their ability to get closer to the poem than I ever will be have to tangle with a reading experience of their poem that is similar to the way a native English speaker might feel in reading a first folio of Shakespeare. It's our language, but it's appearing in a different way. And so I wanted to, through the use of the text, allow the Italian reader to get closer to the dawn of her language. And have that experience. And then, of course, with Paradiso, I continued with the famous Traviziano that we saw from Melissa, which is from a year later, datable, and is considered to be a very fine, clean, error-free example, as much as any manuscript can be that. So you can carry on. So here you have an example of my working process. You've got the Landiano on the left. You've got me writing it on the right, and then me making notes as to where it is different from Petrocchi, where it's different from that text, which is a more recent kind of updated Petrocchi, so to speak. It's not the Lanza. Anyway, it'll come to me. So that's a little bit of how I went through the text. In part because I had to train myself to read that writing. I have no background in any of this. I'm an artist who learned Italian on their junior year abroad and have never stopped wanting to be an Italian. And so I found myself with this project where I had to learn how to read this. And the way to learn how to read it is to read what it's supposed to say and then see if you can find it, and then go back and forth enough times till you can read it, to the extent that you know, when I came to the Triviziano, what I found fascinating is there I had a transcription, because the Lendiano's never been transcribed. The Triviziano has been transcribed, but guess what? The transcriber changed words entirely. Not just spelling, like whole words, different. And when I like, the hair on my arm stood up when I saw it. How could you do that? This is supposed. Anyway, these are the conversations I had with myself as I spent the time to do it. It took a year to make each manuscript. So I did the Italian Inferno in a year. At the time, I was producing the facing page translation. So I also did a manuscript of Anthony Esselin's contemporary translation for Purgatorio. I took about a year to do the manuscript, and I had to go faster for the anniversary for Paradiso, and I think I took closer to 5 months. Next slide. That's the studio where most of it happened. I had to move. So during COVID, I was making Purgatorio. I got kicked out of the studio I was in for 20 years. We lost our lease. I moved it to where I'm currently coming to you from. I had to keep the work going, but this is where it all happened. Next slide. These are some of the research materials that I would consult. I tried to build as much of a Dante library. This is not complete, but it's got some facsimiles in there of some manuscripts, illuminated and otherwise. I've got a first edition Doré. I've got Manfredini, who I love. My goal was to find, as Melissa has done, is to really look at the sconosciuti, the unknown artists, the artists that we have forgotten, paid no attention to, because that's our mistake. And so I intermingle famous with people that likely few have encountered, including many that come from illuminations of a Landino edition, for which there is only one copy. So unless you've seen that facsimile, you won't have seen them. But now I've stuck them next to Michelangelo and given it wider dissemination, which we'll get to. Okay, so next one. I should probably go faster. This is what my home studio would look like as I was going with, you know, here I'm drawing. So I have the prepared text, the English on the left, the Italian on the right. This is Inferno. And I've got pages of all my books open, and I'm looking at every single one that I can fit on the table of that canto, that opening, those images, those artists. So Zuccari and Scaramuzza and Blake and Doré and Flaxman, and that's the Estense up there, and the Altonensis and the Zattas underneath. And I would see what I saw and learn, because some of these artists spent much longer than I did reading Dante and making sure that their drawings were faithful to the text. Others were in free flight from the text, people like Blake, for whom I had no interest until now, because his visionary nature led him to equal his poetic contribution to that of Dante's in many ways. And that was not helpful in my desire to make an illustrated edition that was just the facts. It's sort of, you know, just is the Dragnet edition. It was the one that was, if Dante wrote it, I would draw it. If he didn't write it, you don't see it. And if he and Virgil are just talking about somebody, you don't see the somebody, you just see Virgil and Dante talking, which leaves out a lot of great stuff. Okay, next picture. This is how I tangled with manuscripts digitally. I bought this very expensive CD-ROM at the start of the project because it has an earlier, I forget the name, or I think it's Triviziano and perhaps another, because that's a Triviziano on the front, another earlier edition. I thought that I'll use this in my pursuit of the earliest extant manuscript, but I found it so unbelievably cumbersome. You can't print out full pages, because that's what I was going to do. Anyway, you can go on because I moved on, but it's a relic from another era and a curiosity to librarians, I'm sure. Next slide. Yeah, so now we're back at the studio. So you see the same apparatus in action. Next slide. And now we're starting to get to where it comes together. And here you can see Michelangelo's Minos on the right. And the development of the highly populated limbo, the closing of limbo, where there is sort of the begats section, where it's just a laundry list of everybody who's there. And I was determined to make sure everybody made it in. I didn't want to leave everybody out. And Antonio Grifo got everybody in his fabulous hand-colored edition of the Landino, which I have in facsimile, which you see there next to me. Next slide. So here is an image of the page. The ones that are going to be made from Facsimile Finder are going to be like so much better than this. It's not even, I mean, I feel bad showing these. These are from a lousy scan, and what they're doing is going to, well, it's going to take my breath away. So what you have here is you have that cast of characters. Every single one of the characters mentioned on the left is in that group. Next slide. There they are. Next slide. In case you're wondering which one's which, he wrote Ptolomeo, etc. Next. Look at those. I mean, how do you say Ptolemy? You put a sphere in his hand, right? Next. Lucretia stabbing herself. Next. There she is. Next. And now it's spot the sources. Here I left Saladin on his own, but on a previous page, I took the fact that Dante includes him in Limbo as you know, evidence of his shockingly progressive and inclusive kind of thinking at the time to include such a figure in his conception of Limbo. Here, like in Grifo and in Dante's text, I kind of put him to the side, but earlier I take him from the Brescia edition and I shove him in the crowd as if to make the point that Dante put him there, and you get to see it. I don't have a slide for that. Okay, carry on. Next slide. We're almost there, almost to paradise. And here is a colored version, again, which is hand colored with paint that I make from pigments that were only available in Dante's era, because again, I want you to see it as if Dante saw it. And I have this as kind of the last slide before the latest news from the studio, because there's a good joke in it, and it kind of underscores, I guess, I don't know, a great man of Dublin named James Joyce once said that he put enough puzzles into Ulysses to keep scholars busy for generations, and that was the only way to ensure immortality. Well, I'm doing my best. Born in Dublin as I was, or not raised in Dublin, but anyway, that's another story. So on the right, we have Michelangelo's famous Minos, which as we have learned, was a portrait of a papal emissary who took public objection to the quantity of nude figures in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. And he was very prudish about all of that naked flesh. And so Michelangelo, when he came back to do the final judgment, cast him as Minos with a very accurate portrait, stuck the ears of an ass on him, and had a snake biting his genitalia, lest we wondered what was on that guy's mind. Well, I took Michelangelo's Minos, I kept the nose profile, but I gave him a kingly beard and a crown because he is the king of the underworld. I kept the ass's ears. So here I'm departing from Dante's text, but I'm just making sure you know it's Michelangelo. I take away the snake and I circumcise him. Okay, so Paradise, next. Comics, Wally Wood. Grand master of American comics. At the end of his life, which ended tragically with a suicide, his studio assistants gathered these sketches from around his studio and labeled it 22 Wally Wood's 22 panels that always work. If you count them, they're not 22, they're more. Or some interesting ways to get some variety into those boring panels where some dumb writer has a bunch of lame characters sitting around and talking for page after page. Well, Dante's no dumb writer and his characters aren't lame, but they do sit around and talk for page after page. And I use so many of these kind of formal presentations from the comics, obviously minus a panel limitation. So, you know, I have to deal with the page and the text as it appears as my panel delineations to the extent that I do. But if you look at this and you look through my book, you'll see pages where I have a finger that comes flying in from the left-hand side, just as it does here in the center there on the left. And in Purgatory and Paradise and Inferno, my anxiety, the anxiety that I felt in trying to add to the Lungo Fiume, the long river of work that of artists, some of the greatest of all time, and some of the greatest who remain unfortunately lesser known, that if I was going to add anything, not only did I had to do so much to prepare myself, and once I did, I kind of felt like I wanted to know that everyone to know that I'd sort of done my homework, you know. So Inferno and Purgatory, Inferno really a lot, but Purgatory as well. There's a lot to find that comes from other places, filtered through my speedy brush and pen. But the other day, I was thinking about, I don't know how many of you are fans of the Beatles. I think probably many of you know their music and know that on their first records, there were very few original compositions. It was mostly covers of other artists. They were done in, you know, I mean, John Lennon made Twist and Shout, perhaps more famous than the Isley Brothers did, and that was before Ferris Bueller. But then they dropped Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's, and that's what my Paradise needed to be. It needed to be from another planet. It needed to be so completely untethered and unmoored from everything that has come before it, because it's a completely impossible thing to do. It is such an abstract canticle. I mean, Inferno is a piece of cake because he tells you what he sees. There's a guy holding his head like a lantern. I can draw that. But I needed a way. I needed an approach, and so many things came in to inform my vision. And so I beg your forgiveness as I share this kind of for the first time in one place a little bit, and it's not a very well organized PowerPoint from here on, but the images are there. So the desire to have my thing from Dante's eyes. So where was Dante when he wrote Paradise? He was in Ravenna, likely, right? What did Dante do? Well, we imagined he spent some time in churches. Those churches are decorated with frescoes of images that scholars such as great Laura Pasquini and others have written about the close correlation between some of those mosaics in Ravenna and images in Dante's Purgatory, but mostly in his Paradise. And I thought, oh, well, that's it. I'll just forget everybody who's done anything with Dante, and I'll just steal from the churches, and I'll put what was in Dante's eyes in front of your eyes, literally, as he wrote it. What you're going to see is what was in front of him. And no more other artists. And there's a lot of music in the Divine Comedy, and much has been written about it. And, you know, one way to think about it maybe is in Inferno, all the music appears broken, little pieces of song, incomplete bits, shouted. Then we get unison choruses in Purgatory. And by Paradise, you have polyphony and lots of song. And I thought, great. Since I started this project, I've been trying to, you know, teach myself music on the side. And so I've only realized that I was doing all of that in readiness to make this this canticle, but I thought, well, okay, I'm going to take the music that they're singing and I'm going to visualize the music as it was visualized in the ear, along with, as a layer, images from Ravenna. And meanwhile, it's going to be all Wally Wood of just Beatrice and Dante talking and having it out. And that I could explore the range of emotions found often in comic books that Beatrice and Dante express in their endless conversations that sometimes are interrupted by the visitation of somebody else. And the last sort of piece that was missing in my ability to get to where I am now came with this new publisher. When I started, I was with a publisher who decided after doing Inferno that they didn't want to continue for a host of reasons. They didn't want to finish the job. So I was left without a publisher for a couple of years. I knocked on a lot of doors, made a lot of phone calls in the forms of emails, and all I got was closed doors. And then eventually Facsimile Finder, after I'd finished Purgatory, even though it's completely out of their normal wheelhouse, decided that they would undertake this with me. And once they got involved, I could do something I could never do before with my art. It's still a black and white thing. But when I made my art for Inferno, and I continued in that vein largely with Purgatory, because I didn't know who was going to pick, if anybody was going to pick me up. And if they picked me up and they wanted to have it just be like Inferno, then it was going to be ready for letterpress, which meant I had to make a certain kind of art that was line art dominant. No value, no grays, none of that. It's black or white, end of story. Well, now I can do something else. So next page. The end of Purgatory, seen in the first 2 pages of Paradise. So here you can see the remnants of where I had left the spaces blank for the text to be inserted. I'm not doing that anymore. The text gets dropped in digitally anyway. So you'll see that I am fully illustrating the complete page going forward because it's a necessity due to the materials I'm using. So this is the last of the old. This is the last of the old world, the last of the earthly world. This is drawn in a style that is rich. I mean, it is so littered with sources. It's Natini's tree, it's Grifo's tree, it's Giotto's tree, it's Zuccotti's tree, it's Scaramuzza's waterfall. The plants are from all these weird, the Altonensis is in there. I mean, there are all these things from all over the place. It's right? Stuffed. In comics, we call that chicken fat, coming from Bill Elder. The idea that you stuff a picture so filled with jokes and stuff, you can just spend, you get the drift, but then you can spend as much time as you want getting all the sub drifts. So next page. So here, Dante and Beatrice, I still am finishing it, filling in those middle sections as I go, as I get back to it. But here, Dante and Beatrice are leaving Earth and ascending, and the balls of the tree and the sun are going to become the balls of the planet. And this is what I'm so excited about. Next page. The Atomizer. The Atomizer is an ancient tool nobody uses anymore, which is one of the reasons why I use it, because if I use it, my work looks different from everybody else's. It turns you into an air gun, an aerosol. You blow through a series of straws and it creates a mist of ink or whatever, watercolor, whatever waterborne media you want. And depending on how hard you spray and your distance to the surface, you create a different kind of series of dot patterns. Through a series of masking the paper, you can create tones. Next. So that's Dante and Beatrice going to the moon. Here's the moon again. Here's the Earth back there. Here I took out the masks and cut them into shapes and plates and made them as the spots because, you know, there's a lot of dermatological conversation about spots on the moon. So I thought I needed to find a way to make a lot of interesting looking spots. Next page. And the Beatrice here is straight out of Wally Wood. She's going to flash between a kind of 50s damsel to a raging, kind of, what's the word? I mean, she's wronged, right? I mean, she justified anger. You're going to see that too, hopefully. And here, you know, Dante has always been dark, right? He's always had a series of hatching lines to distinguish him from Virgil. And as he goes to paradise, he loses a little bit of that. And I'm debating whether I should make him darker to counterpoint Beatrice, but for the moment, he's mostly staying light to indicate that he is kind of entering into this sort of spirit realm, although he is obviously still living because he's yet to write the poem. Go ahead. Next one. Now we're on the moon. And of course, you're seeing these images, and you'll notice there's two spots, and that's where the text will get dropped in. And so it's very carefully delineated so that all of the essential information in the drawing will be in the final work. Now here, as you have Picarda and Constance leaving the song, you have the first evidence of song. And so down there, you have Sanctus Sanctus. I wrote out the musical bars and then placed tape, masking tape, indicating the size of the note and the shape that music manuscripts from the era were written. They weren't written with our notation, they're written with these kind of boxes, which is great for me. So that is the music across the bottom, and it's Wally Wood's Moonscape, and the women are from the Donna la Tombe, the women at the tomb, from Ravenna. Next. Now Dante cannot handle looking at how bright Beatrice is, and so I just blow out the page. And right now I'm so behind schedule, frankly, I need to find a lot of ways to shortcut the pages because this atomizer business takes so long with the masking process. I could go so much faster with the first two, but it's okay, it's worth it. So here, and I've got next one, I got a close up of Dante. This is straight Wally Wood, I just put the hat on. You know, it's the tragic hero. It's full of pathos, hopefully. But he's also kind of in denial, you know? I mean, he's being given the business and he can't look. And I know what that feels like. Next one. This is Dante and Beatrice floating up into the space on their way to Mercury. I love this one because I could do it so fast. Next, I mean, and it's Natini. I mean, if you look at the pose of the figures, it's Natini. I just shrunk them and stuck them up there, and then sprayed with a different pattern. You know, I don't know what Dante thought Mercury looked like, and I don't have time to research exactly what he did. And I know what Botticelli thought he looked like, but I'm not interested in that. So I'm letting the atomizer take over. But next one. Here we have Justinian appearing. Now, this is a little bit, you know, here again, the atomizer technique allows me to, you know, do all kinds of things I could never do before. Here, Justinian is beginning to appear as he appears in Ravenna in the fresco. Now, there is one that Dante would have seen, and this is the one that Dante would have seen. There's another one that there was a Teodora that they have recently discovered or reattributed. Next slide. That's that one. So that's me literally copying the fresco. I mean, the mosaic. Just turning it into a value drawing. Next. I feel like I'm going totally over time with my enthusiasm. I apologize. Dante's got 3 big doubts. Beatrice is going to tell him what he should think about those. Next. Okay, the bottom section of music. Next page. There it is. Next page. There it is with the masks off. That's straight Natini. That's where I am. So that's where I'll end. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, George. Thank you for sharing these with us. Really, it's phenomenal to see the way that the project has developed and where Paradiso is leading. Some really remarkably striking images. As someone who, when I'm not working on Dante and Friends, sings sings quite a lot of particularly sacred choral music. It was very striking, and indeed sings a lot of plain chant. So that notation, I found myself inadvertently, almost instinctively humming along as I saw it on the page. So really wonderful to see those things brought together, because it really is, music really is such a central part of what's going on in the Paradiso. And in fact, next week in Cambridge, there'll be the book launch of a book by a colleague, Helena Phillips Robbins, on Dante and the Music of Purgatory. I can't remember now the exact book title, but it's going to be knowing Helena's work, it's going to be a fantastic piece of work on those questions. So it's a lovely coming together of events for me, and coming together of media. I don't want to take time from, I'm sure there'll be many questions from those in attendance. I'm going to abuse my privilege as the mediator here to ask a couple of initial questions, and also to encourage you, George and Melissa, to ask any questions you have of each other. But I also do very much want to open up the floor to those who have joined us this evening. So the question I wanted to ask as a kind of an opening general question is almost not a question, but a word: materiality. Because one thing I found really fascinating in obviously there are the broader questions of what it means to have a digital versus the physical object, or physical versus digital archive, and these were issues we were raising, Melissa, about the access that's available with the digital work when we're stuck at home. George, you were talking about the inability, or the kind of the almost the kind of block of trying to work from a text on a screen and having to have the physical book in front of you. Melissa, in many of the images you showed us, you had Dante at his writing desk, Dante with the tools of writing, which indeed echoes some of the key tropes in the poem itself, where Dante talks very, very enthusiastic, or not very enthusiastic, very kind of bluntly in places about the fact that he's run out of the leaves set aside for writing this cantica. He tells us about the material efforts of the process, so I wanted to really kind of hone in on, and perhaps maybe even ask for you to speak to each other's work as well as your own, on what the kind of material experience of the work you've been doing has been like on a text which itself is so, in the absence of an autograph, so dependent on a kind of already second-hand material afterlife.
George, do you want to start? Well, for one thing, I do want to say I am a huge fan of what George and what George has done, because to me that's so exciting. And George has done something that most of the early illustrators did not do. You're going to try to illustrate every single canto in Paradiso, right, George? And you've done it for Purgatorio. And that is almost unheard of. I think Yates Thompson 36 is the only one, and it was two different artists. But I do want to say that when all my trips were canceled, I went into a huge panic and like near clinical depression, because I was planning to go and look at, some of the, especially in Florence, because a lot of the Florentine manuscripts that are justifiably very famous are not yet digitized. And, I think that's why I started doing this meditative thing. I first went into Dante Online and just started looking at whatever was there. And George has kind of lived out, George, I think I wrote to you about this, but he's kind of lived out a fantasy I had, because I did start out as a calligrapher in my teen years, and I was okay, I was pretty good. I got paid to do it, but I've never had George's kind. I can draw, but I never had his creativity or artistic talent. And I knew at some point, like I was going to take the academic route, although I still have this like thing. I'm going to get back to my artwork, which, I have not done a big, I would have to say my office is not set up to do artwork. But I really admire, George, what you've done, because it's such an amazing project, and it took so much commitment. And you say you're not a scholar, but indeed you are, because you've done all this research and you've taken it and turned it into something completely new, just completely original. And I'm so, as George can tell you, I tried to be the first person on Kickstarter, but Giovanni Scorcione's mother beat me to it. But, if anybody had to beat me.
La mama.
But because I am just so, because I do, I mean, I am certainly aware of, I have a clock with Blake's, you know, Inferno on it. I have all these, you know, I have a lot of other, but my heart belongs to the Middle Ages. But I think that George is like these medieval artists. He's taken it on and more. Because when you said you were handwriting the whole thing, I thought, this guy is my brother from another mother. I mean, he is so amazing. And we've had so much fun, even private messages and things. I have a picture up of George's studio, all his different sketches on my, you know, Dante ephemera board. I shouldn't call it ephemera, my fun Dante board, which I'd show you if I could pull it around. So with that, you know, hymn of praise to George. What can I say? Well, yeah, I would have to say, David, that I was pleasantly surprised to find all that I found, because I was in a heap. You know, our trips, my husband's trips and mine, my research trips, the trips with the students, everything was canceled. And that was just the beginning of the horror of the pandemic. I mean, I've had relatives nearly die. I've had, you know, I mean, blah, blah, blah. You know, I almost hate to say anything good came out of it. But what I did realize is that being able to blow things up, being able to go into deep focus and doing something I never would have time to do in a library, no matter how long I have, go page, leaf by leaf, I should say, leaf by leaf by leaf. You know, if I were in the Bibliothèque Nationale, I wouldn't have called that one little manuscript that I showed you, that Italian 70, because it wouldn't have been worth my time. You know, it would have been beneath my dignity or something, you know, as I perceived it. And so to have that bizarre discipline I put on myself, illustrated or not, this is your job, actually taught me a lot. I think it opened my eyes in a way that just working as I have with, you know, high-end liturgical manuscripts, you know, high-end illustrated manuscripts, I think I have a whole new appreciation. But, and then like finding what George was doing, it was just too good to be true. I mean, God, there's this guy in New York who's doing this, the whole new manuscript. So there, all right. Did I answer the question though, David? I think I'll always work with both from now on. I think I'll always, before I go to a library, and not everything, certainly not everything is digitized yet, and probably won't be in my lifetime, but certainly I will always, you know, I will no longer say, oh, these digital things are, I can't hear the parchment. As I turn it, I can't smell it. Yeah, great. Get locked in your house for a year and see how you do.
Thank you very much, Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, for the first thing that you know I have to say is, you know, apologize for not having it neatly organized in my PowerPoint. But the issue you bring up about of Dante, as the notion of Dante as a writer, and the act of writing, and the ways that he is, you know, so modern to us in his level of self-consciousness about his craft. I took the 3 historiated lead letters for each canticle and did a bell elder, did a chicken fat, and tried to tell a story. So I don't have them in front of me. I can show you. I can show you something from Purgatory. I think the source image for the P that I made for Purgatory, you may have, because Giovanni provided. And I don't know if he provided you with more, but I'll tell you what the trajectory is as we try to find some images. So what happens when Dante is writing Inferno, right? What happens? He's on the run. He's probably broke. He's most desperate. He's not a famous, I mean, if he's a famous writer, he's not famous for writing what he's about to write. And so he is, as he is throughout the course of writing Divine Comedy, subject to the generosity of benefactors and so on. And there is a known and also speculative history and a healthy degree of uncertainty about exactly where he was when he wrote what, and where, you know, who, all the rest of it. But in the N, the P, and the L, I created the architecture of the letter using architectural forms from the town that he was in when he wrote it. The view that he sees from his writing stool is of the town, the skyline of the town that he's in. He starts in Inferno sitting on the most poor stool you can imagine. In Paradiso, he's on a little bit nicer one. And by Purgatorio is a little better. By Paradiso, he's sitting in a chair that has a back. There is somewhere the crest of the family that is hosting him. So in the Purgatorio, the Della Scala family, the latter crest, is hanging from the P. And I love, Melissa, that you brought this up, because I turned the P into a window and Dante's arm is leaning out the window of the P. I don't know if we can we pull that up? It's on the advertisement for the program. Because if we can see that, then I can show you even more chicken fat stuff. That's fun. You're muted, so I'm not hearing what you're saying.
Sorry, I should be able to put that for you now.
Okay, great. So, yeah.
Apologies for the state of my screen.
That's all right. I don't know. Is there any way to make it big? There we go. Make it bigger. Great. Okay. So the column is from the cathedral. The tower form is architecture of the city. Okay, I lied. Dante's no room for a chair here because you can't see it because he's leaning his arm out the window. The Della Scala crest is hanging from the P. And Dante is looking at a picture. All right. Now, what is he looking at? And now, can I share a screen?
Yeah, I can also share the same. I can share the other image as well.
I don't think we can share at the same time, right? You may have to stop.
Yeah.
And I'll see if I can do this.
Okay. If not, I have it ready to go.
So Dante is looking at something. Oh, go away, all this stuff. Sorry. Let's try this again. This is why I don't. Oh, did it really go away?
It's to the. I bet it's to the side on your screen, George.
Oh.
Was it this one, George? Oh, no, not that one. Sorry.
I think I emailed it.
Yeah, you did. I'm just flipping to
okay.
it.
Yeah. So I'll tell you as it's coming up. So Dante is looking at a drawing. What is the drawing? The drawing is of Dante and Virgil in a little boat. That's inside this. There you go.
Yeah, okay.
So this is the Codex Altonensis. There's Dante and Virgil in the boat, and I copy this drawing, and I make Dante looking at it as if he's proofing and deciding if this artist is good enough. Because I want to know if I'm good enough. Like, would Dante approve of my efforts, right? He would at least call me pazzo, you know, like, so there we go. Materiality, I am, you know, for those astrologically concerned, I'm a double earth sign. I'm all about material, dirt, earth, getting my fingers dirty. I have a very hard time with screen and interactivity, which is why the whole Twitter experience of finding all of you is so wonderful, because it felt like there was actual gravity behind what I feel like never lands with me. Whereas, you know, I mean, I'm trying to learn Dante. I need it in my eyes in ways that a screen won't put it there. What's on a screen is there because I asked to see it. I looked for it, so I found it. If I have a book, I can flip through it and see a picture. It lodges in my brain. Then a week or two goes by and I need an image and it's in my brain. I don't need to have that page open on my screen to see it again. It comes out, right? So I need to be bathing in the material culture of Dante to produce the work. And on the point of you know, handwriting and scribes, before I started my graphic novel, I literally could not read my own handwriting. So as far as I'm concerned, anyone can learn to write neatly.
There's hope for me yet.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judge. It is very striking, isn't it, that the one thing that browsers don't let us do is actually browse. No, I think these are fascinating points and really raise kind of some of the kind of the key questions that I had buzzing around in my mind. At this point, I really do want to see if anybody has any questions. Anybody in the audience has any questions? Please do use the little hand, raise the hand in your reactions. I do see there was one question already registered in the chat from Tom Parisi, who was wondering why you chose the singleton translation, George.
It's sort of a long story, short story. The short stories, it's my favorite. The other part of the short story is because like I was able to choose for this edition. I was not able to choose for Inferno. When I did Inferno, the publisher wanted an utterly contemporary version, which meant I needed to find a translator who had done all three and was still alive. And at the time, I wanted to do, and this will be meaningful for so many of you, I wanted to do Hollander, his version, and the publisher insisted that he was deceased. This is in 2014, 2015. He insisted he was deceased. I said, no, he's not. I've got a friend who's got a daughter at Princeton, just took his class. No, he's deceased. You can't. And he was so convinced, for whatever reason, that he was deceased that I couldn't do Hollander. So it's like, all right, well, Esselin's fine. I hope no one's a huge fan. I find him way too like cheeky and trying to be now to be good, but that's aside from the fact. I honestly don't care about that as much as I do the Italian. So when I got to choose Singleton's the one for me, because he doesn't try to be a poet. Everybody else tries to be a poet. They're trying to match the lines. They're trying to make it maybe rhyme. That's a really bad idea. You know, maybe they're not trying to make it rhyme, but the line length is all wrong. All the rhythm's gone. All the sound is gone. So what are you doing? You're trying to find words that fit, but might not be best. And of course, you just start with Dante, who begins with a polysemous language. He himself says that everything he says has at least 4 meanings. So a translator's got to pick pick one. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the one who has to make that decision. Okay? Singleton, to me, sidesteps this because he's just trying to tell you what Dante says. And when he has doubts, his commentary is so thorough and he's so self-effacing and he doesn't try to be a poet. And from my point of view, I need text that's really plastic because it's got to fit in those spaces. I hand lettered Esselin. There was no way I could hand letter also all of Singleton and get 2021. So the publisher created this unbelievable font, which really will fool your eye because it fools mine into thinking that I wrote it. And that's what we will use for the Singleton. If you get the Italian version or you see the Italian version, that will be my hand letter. And they're different. Inferno, my hand is different from Paradiso, and you won't get that in Singleton, I don't think. But I love Singleton.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from those present?
Can I chime in for a second? I asked this question about
yeah, please do, Tom. Thanks.
Yeah, really my question was, why take the time to do any English translation at all when it's such a huge undertaking?
Well, you have to keep in mind that this whole project was not my idea. That I showed up at a publisher's doorstep to work on my project and I got hijacked. And so part of that hijacking was his conception of what this was. So his conception was a facing page translation. And the fact is that I would probably guess that 90% of the people who have Inferno are native English speakers, or English is the language they're approaching it from. But now that those parameters are not there, but the audience is still there. I mean, presumably a lot of the people who are going to be, reading this book are going to be reading an English translation. I wanted to provide an English version. This version will be different. It's not facing page translation. If it was a facing page translation, it'd be like an 800-page book, prohibitively expensive, or produced in multiple volumes, which we didn't want to do. So you pick one or the other. And allows us maximum plasticity in the art that already exists.
George, I think your connection has dropped. Oh no, you're back. Okay, wonderful. You froze for a moment.
I'm back. I just lost you.
Okay.
May I chime in for a minute?
It happens.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I was delighted that you picked the singleton, because I have the same reaction to most of the translations as you do, that I can read the Italian, and I didn't need an Italian copy, but I didn't have the singleton, and I was just delighted because I always felt like he just wanted to get the story out. Like so many people, even the best translators, and there are some really tremendous ones, it's always a little off. And so thank you. I was delighted.
Dara.
Yeah, no, it's a very quick question to George, because I mean, it was fascinating your discussion about your method and the kind of the levels of kind of the references that you're making within the jokes, the private, the public, and all of that. I was just wondering, what was your strategy in the Purgatorio when you get to say something like Canto 10 and you have Dante describing divine art, this visibile parlare, the engravings on the Terrace of the Proud. How did you deal with art in Dante? Visual.
I copied other art that was better than anything I could come up with. So I looked to other artists' depictions of that, and so I used. I think it was primarily Scaramuzza, but I also would try to correct it. So I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Crumb's version of Genesis, but when Robert Crumb, the American cartoonist, did his Genesis, he did the kind of research that I admire beyond belief. He knew exactly what kind of clothing, architecture people were wearing, the ambient of the period in which Genesis takes place, so that his depictions were as accurate as possible. And that was, always my goal. And that's silly. It's impossible. It's a poem, right? So what's visible, what's beautiful. So to a degree, that becomes a little bit slippery. What I would do is I would try to go to other sources. So for instance, when you have the king, the king dancing in front of the procession in the bas-relief, I wanted to make sure that he was wearing clothing that a king would have worn from that era. So I did a bunch of research and I discovered exactly how the garments fell and all that, so that mine would be, accurate. But I also am a little bit snarky, because I would correct other artists who made mistakes. So, famously in Inferno, when Dante and Virgil meet the Simoniacs, their feet are on fire and there's flames coming from their feet. And if you look at Doré's wonderful illustrations, the fire marshal has already been there, because the feet are not on fire. There's a fire coming from down underneath the ground. You see the billowing smoke. It's completely not what Dante wrote. So I copy exactly the kind of baptismal font form that Doré uses correctly. And I use his legs, but I make sure the fire is coming from the top of the feet, So there are little moments like that that I would do. But I also know that, I'm sure I got a lot of things wrong. And how could I not?
And can I just chime there chime in there to say, in some ways, I hope you did, because as I think Melissa will agree, one of the great joys of working with manuscripts is identifying errors and through them finding lineages of a text or lineages of a kind of artistic development. So in some ways, and you mentioned this also in your copying from the manuscript, you wouldn't. It would be a true scribal experience if every now and again you did skip over a word or accidentally repeat something. So there is a kind of joy. I think this comes back to the materiality of the text as well. There is a joy in the erroneous, and I think that is something to be embraced, both in the kind of the study of the manuscript and in the production of it. Perhaps
absolutely, it keeps it. it keeps it alive for us. It keeps the discussion alive. And, you know, and so we have to rethink what our notion of an error is.
Yeah.
You know, there is no way for anyone, you could proofread Inferno, and Inferno has been proofread. And if you find a mistake, I'm sorry, because I tried to make it perfect. But when it comes to the Landiano, it cannot be proofread. It's not been transcribed, so I can't give somebody a copy to look at it. Somebody's got to go get a facsimile and look, and nobody's going to do that. So I proofread it 3 times. That's as good as it's going to get. The Triviziano, yeah, that's out there, but I've already told you that the transcription is incorrect, so that's not really trustworthy. So 2 of these have been unproofread by anybody but me. I'm sure there are errors.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of the time, but I just want to just open up to the floor if anybody has any last questions or a last question for George and Melissa today, before drawing things to a conclusion. Okay, in which case, I would like to thank both of our participants today, George Cochrane and Melissa Conway, for their fascinating presentations and discussion, for really opening up a treasure trove of illustrations of the Divine Comedy, past and present and imminent, and to thank you all here for joining us this evening for the last of our Dante Dialogue series for the academic year. We look forward to welcoming you to future events. We look forward to future conversations with many of you, and I look forward to Melissa's tweets every day and to getting my copy of of George's Commedia in the post once the Kickstarter and the Indiegogo have closed. So if you'd all like to join me in thanking George and Melissa with a round of applause, thank you both so much.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a deep honor to be here. Thank you very much, everyone.
Indeed, and a lot of fun too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And of
if
course,
anybody has any serious questions about the manuscripts, I can answer those too. But why stop kidding around now, right?
Dante is very funny. There's a lot of humor in Dante, and lest we forget how funny he is.
Well, absolutely, and just also the spirit of the kind of the snarky correction and supersession of past artists is in a very Dantean spirit. Let's just say that.
It has to be done. I probably even corrected Botticelli. I mean, you know, the hubris is astonishing.
No, he got some things wrong though, George. He did. And yeah, so nobody's perfect.
I mean, Dante does go around editing the Bible according to what he sees in his vision versus accounts of the various kind of the class schools of angels and so on and so forth. So I don't think you need to worry about an excess of hubris. Well, I mean, obviously you have to worry about the weight of the stone on your back for some time to come, but that too is in a very Dantean spirit. So I wouldn't worry too much.
Great.
It's a marvelous afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone who's here. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.